Thank you, Ms. Merle. And Ms. Chaudhry, let me start with you. You heard the earlier questioning of the first panel and the question of advocacy, which has been a big part of your life and your work as an attorney, professional attorney, and what impact that might have on you as service as a district court judge. Would you like to comment your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Senator. I understand the fundamentally different role between an advocate and a judge. I started my career as a law clerk to two federal judges and saw what it means to look and consider cases impartially and neutrally and fairly. As an advocate, I have zealously represented the interests and legal positions of my clients, which I am obligated to do. It is part of my ethical duties. But I now am ready to serve as a judge. And what a judge does is look at each case, one at a time, with an open mind, open to being persuaded by the parties, looking scrupulously at the factual record, comprehensively researching the law, and applying precedent. In my case, it would be Supreme Court and Second Circuit precedent to reach a decision that is compelled by the law. And that is the oath that I would take if I'm so fortunate as to be confirmed.
Thank you very much. Ms. Merle, the issue of racism comes up in this committee room regularly, whether it exists, and there are those who question it as to whether it exists, whether it is systemic in America, and how it should be taught to our children. Judge Katanya Brown Jackson, before this committee just a few weeks ago, was quizzed by several members on critical race theory. I'm at a loss to define that term. It's rather new, and I've heard a lot of different variations on the theme, and she said she never relied on it for any decision making. But I would like you to address the one case that you briefed to the Supreme Court, Buck versus Davis, because I thought it gave an interesting insight into the issue of racism in current court cases.
Thank you for the question, Chair Durbin. And you invoked Justice Thurgood Marshall earlier, so I must note that LDF, in representing our criminal clients, we follow in his footsteps, and we keep an eye towards taking cases where we can address discrimination in the criminal justice system. In Mr. Buck's case in particular, Mr. Buck was convicted and sentenced to death after his own trial attorney presented expert testimony that Mr. Buck was more likely to be dangerous in the future because he is Black. That question of future dangerousness, was a central question for the jury in determining his sentence. The Legal Defense Fund represented Mr. Buck, challenging his sentence, questioning whether his sentence met basic constitutional requirements. The Supreme Court, in a 6-2 decision, held that it did not, that Mr. Buck had been denied his Sixth Amendment right to counsel. The court also reaffirmed the fundamental premise in our country that we are not sentenced for who we are, but for what we do. And that such racial stereotype, which infected Mr. Buck's case, that even in small doses, it could be pernicious.
And you virtually quoted the Chief Justice in that case, done your homework for this hearing. He said, "This is a disturbing departure from a basic premise of our criminal justice system. Our law punishes people for what they do, not who they are," which I think gets down to the heart of the matter. May I ask you, Ms. Chaudhry, you were also involved in the consent decree with the Chicago Police Department. Tell us a little bit about your role and what you learned in that experience.
Thank you, Senator. I serve as counsel to the ACLU of Illinois and other community organizations enforcing a consent decree governing systemic reform of the Chicago Police Department. That consent decree was entered into by the department and the Illinois Attorney General after the findings of the Department of Justice that the department had engaged in a pattern and practice of excessive force against communities of color, as well as incidents of overt racial discrimination that were unaddressed by supervisors. In my role, I have collaborated with other counsel in the case, as well as the parties and the police, to help bring about more constitutional and effective policing, including in the area of ensuring peaceful protest and expressions of speech in the city of Chicago. And so in that effort, what I seek to do on behalf of my clients as counsel is to advance constitutional, effective, and safe policing, including supports for officer mental health and wellness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chaudhry. And I'll turn it over to to Senator Kennedy.